very warm welcome. My name's David Roth and I'm the CEO of the store WPP and Chairman of BAV. And it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to Follow the Sun, 24 hours of broadcasting right across the world, to celebrate the launch of the WPP BAV Best Countries study for 2022, produced in conjunction with the US News and Wharton Business School. It's a pleasure to have you join us for this session. This broadcast is going to travel right across the world, starting in New Zealand and ending 24 hours later in the USA. We have an absolutely packed broadcast today. This year's Best Countries study is our fullest and most comprehensive yet. The attitudes of global business leaders, opinion formers and citizens towards nation strengths has changed dramatically in recent years, never more so than in 2022. And we'll be looking at how those changes in values have impacted overall perceptions of our 85 nations covered in the 2022 study. But perceptions of a country only tell half the story. We'll then visit 24 countries to hear what's happening from WPP experts on the ground, and sometimes how perceptions of a country don't really reflect the situation. Now, our time together promises to be informative, challenging, stimulating, and I hope fun. So let's get started. How a country is viewed around the world is of huge importance, politically, economically, and socially. It has the ability to contribute to both a nation's hard and soft power. The Romans understood this well. SPQR, an abbreviation for Centanus Populosque Romanus, was arguably the first country branding. It was an emblematic, abbreviated phrase referring to the government of the ancient Roman Republic. You only needed to see the emblem, and invaded countries knew exactly what was in store for them. So country branding itself is not new, but measuring it is. Now in our 7th year, the WPP BAV Annual Best Countries Rankings measures global perceptions of countries against a series of characteristics, impressions that have the potential to drive trade, travel and investment. They also directly affect brands. The study was developed by WPP BAV, the Wharton Business School of the University of Pennsylvania, and US News. The ranking is based on a large global survey which asks a range of people about how they perceive different countries against a range of key attributes. Country branding also has a significant impact on corporate and product brands. The words "made in" can instantly lend credibility and trust to a product or brand that a consumer hasn't previously encountered. That could be enough to convince someone to buy, and beyond that, convince them to pay a premium. Likewise, "made in" can prove an instant turn-off if a consumer associates the country of origin with poor safety standards or sees it as being behind the times on social issues or workers' rights. But it's not just a one-way reaction. The perceptions and performance of brands abroad feed back into the development of the country itself. Additionally, willingness for corporates to invest vital FDI is also closely linked to the strength of a country's brand. As local brands and businesses succeed, they generate economic growth as well as lending further positive associations to their country's brand. There's a close relationship between how people feel about a country and their attitudes towards the brand they associate with that country. Strong countries fuel strong brands and vice versa. Think of France and Chanel. Both represent elegance, glamour and prestige. Chanel is intrinsically French, and France is synonymous with Chanel. The same can be said of Italy and Ferrari, or Japan and Sony. In each case, brands and the countries are part of a virtuous circle, a symbiotic relationship. In fact, Germany is a really fine example of this symbiosis in action. Germany has come to represent the qualities of durability and engineering that brands like Bosch, BMW, Audi and Mercedes have shown the world that Germany can deliver. Brands can both shape and be shaped by the perceptions of their country of origins. Japan in the 1970s was known as a cheap manufacturing base, but now respected as a world leader for quality electronics and also technology, thanks largely to brands like Sony and Toyota. South Korea has taken a similar path, with Samsung and Hyundai demonstrating to the entire world what modern South Korea is and is doing, so creating consumer predisposition in international markets that favour other South Korean brands. There's a two-way reaction and a multiplier effect for both. This year's study quantifies the impact. We see that 83% of consumers globally agree that consumer brands play an important role in defining a country's culture. 78% also agree that the country a product is made in impacts my preference to purchase it. Our annual Best Countries ranking was first launched in 2016 at the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, the world's largest gathering of global leaders and heads of industry and influence. It's now in its 7th year, and given how turbulent the past 7 years have been across the globe, enables us to see the impact of the changes. The Best Country ranking incorporates the views of close to 18,000 individual members of the public and business decision makers, surveyed in 85 countries across the world. This year's survey was completed in mid-2022. Collectively, the 85 countries in the 2022 rankings account for about 95% of global gross domestic product per capita and represent 80% of the world's population. Individuals surveyed for Best Countries were asked how closely they associated 73 attributes with a range of countries. These attributes were then grouped into 10 categories that were used to calculate the Best Countries ranking, and more on those attributes later. So come with me as we meet our first guests on our interview stage. Well, I'm very delighted now to be joined by Lord Jim O'Neill, the former Chief Economist of Goldman Sachs and a former government UK Minister and Chairman of Chatham House. Jim, Lord O'Neill, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
President Zelensky has said that the price we have to pay for avoiding a third world war is going to be higher energy bills, increases in the cost of living, and a reduction in living standards. And this comes at a time where we see from our BAV Best Countries study that softer values, sort of like quality of life and social purpose, are much more important in defining a nation's brand. But do you think that public opinion at the moment will pressurise governments to hold their current policies, or do you think they will start to look at alternatives?
Nice, easy question that you start with. I don't know, because it is probably for my generation, never mind the younger generation, the first such issue of this scale and complexity that we've seen. So far, it appears Western nations, who are the prime supporters of Ukraine, of course, have been happy to support the government stance on Ukraine, and superficially accept the cost, which is essentially this enormous cost of living shock. But it remains to be seen how that passes the test of time. So as we're seeing here, the government itself is almost definitely going to have to pay for the cost of this dilemma. I can't help finishing my answer to this very tricky question by also pointing out that if we really want to be serious about climate change and alternative energies, having a permanently higher price for carbon emitting energy forms is probably ultimately the sort of thing that is needed. One would imagine accelerate the desire for alternative energies to become more and more part of everyday life.
Now, you were chairman of the Chatham House, one of the world's leading think tanks. Its mission of a world that is sustainable, secure and prosperous is great. What do you feel, how far are we from realising that goal?
Isn't and hasn't really worked the way it's supposed to do on the tin.
So Jim, what should the priorities of nations be then now?
Yeah, so what should we do about it? You know, I've become linked to a number of things I've been involved in, a big believer in what I broadly call profit with purpose. And we need to have business itself think more about the societal remit of who ultimately they serve. We've lived in an era, and still do, of where the only thing that matters for many, certainly publicly quoted business, is the shareholder. And it's not enough. And private business shouldn't be rewarded if we don't have productivity that goes with these big gains for them. And policymakers need to be more alert to the realities of life rather than just what was in economic textbooks of the 1960s and 70s. And if we don't learn from that, I have a fear that some of the dilemmas that have just blown up dramatically in the past few years out of nowhere could actually get worse.
Now, we started with a hard question, so let's end with an easy one. Lord O'Neill, are you an optimist or a pessimist given the situation we see around the world today?
Right now, I feel a lot more pessimistic than I've done for a long time. However, that said, I've been around the policy area in many different forms for over 40 years, and I've lived through a lot of crises. And the one thing I know for sure is that the crisis you're in, even though it often seems the worst you've ever been through, they come to an end. And one of the big things I've learned is never let a crisis go to waste. And indeed, the making of a business, a leader, or of a country is how they respond to the crisis you are in, because it normally defines how you're going to deal with the future era. So in that sense, there are lots of ways of things that could emerge from all of this mess in a more positive way.
Well, Lord Jim O'Neill, ending on a slightly more positive note than we started, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's been a privilege to hear what you have to say. Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me joining you.
As we travel around the world together in our Follow the Sun broadcast, we'll be hearing news, views and insights from local WPP company colleagues in 24 of the 85 countries covered in the WPP BAV Best Countries study for 2022. Now, before we go to one of those countries, let's remind ourselves of the WPP BAV Best Countries 2022 rankings from the 85th down to the number 1 country. Let's see what the overall findings of Best Countries 2022 are before we go to Kenya for local insights from the WPP team there. And don't forget to download the Best Countries Metaverse experience for even more global insights from the address on your screen. Historically, military power and finance, banks and tanks were the attributes against which we measured a country's power in the world. Not anymore. So what does all this mean? It shows that a nation focused on providing great quality of life for its people, which cares about the rights and equality, and has a focus on entrepreneurship, is seen as having the most powerful nation brand. This reflects a world today and the factors that influence public perceptions and consumer decision-making, and by implication, a nation's political policy making. So let's take a look at those 10 factors and their weights for 2022. Entrepreneurship, 14.2%. Cultural influence, 10.4%. Power, 5%. Heritage, 3.1%. Adventure, 5.5%. Quality of life, 14.5%. Open for business, 9.3%. Social purpose, 13.5%. Agility, 14%. Movers, 10.6%. So it's clearly no longer just tanks and banks that give a country influence around the world. Softer power, which comes about as a result of entrepreneurship and cultural exports, is increasingly making an impact.
Hi there, I'm Chesang.
Hi, I'm Lucas.
Hello, my name is Adele.
And Fidel is I. Welcome to another episode of Follow the Sun by Ogilvy Africa. So today we're here to talk about content being king.
And before that, we must answer the most important question: what is content?
So I checked, and according to Google, content is information contained within communication media. It includes everything from the internet, TV, radio, physical art, and even live events. It is directed at an end user or audience in the sectors of publishing, art, and communication.
In short, what our ancestors used to call stories is now what the digital era calls content.
And rightfully so, because of the huge changes and differences in today's media.
Unlike us, our ancestors weren't influencers on Instagram, they weren't telling stories on TikTok, they're just telling stories within the fire pit, singing, having wall paintings. But today, everything's on Netflix, Showmax, DSTV, YouTube, all these platforms.
And I guess we can say that digitization of communication is actually content, yeah?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the clear distinction came with the emergence of social media. By connecting different people from all corners of the world together, it changed how we communicate, from what we say to how we say it.
So guys, when do you think social media started?
Well, if you take a poll, most people will say Facebook.
When we first launched, we were hoping for, maybe 400, 500 people. Harvard didn't have a Facebook, so that's the gap that we were trying to fill. And now we're at 100,000 people, so who knows where we're going next. We're hoping to have many more universities by the fall, hopefully over 100 or 200. And from there, we're going to launch a bunch of side applications, which should keep people coming back to the site and maybe could make something cool.
It really started with platforms like MySpace, Friendster, High Five, so it goes way back.
Oh, Chesang, you've mentioned High Five, you've taken my mind. Back then, before anything. There was, yahoo.com. Before LOL, there was AOL.com, and I was actually on High Five.
I remember back in the day, there were cyber cafes in every neighborhood. We'd spend all day poking each other on Facebook.
And creating those funny pages, oh my goodness, like different names like Fly Guy 254.
Mr. Steal Your Girl.
Oh my goodness, those were the good days. We have really come a long way from then. Now there's an app for everyone and everyone is on the app.
Our everyday photographers have IG, our conversationalists are headstrong on Twitter, our family and friends have Facebook, and professionals have LinkedIn.
Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, Snapchat. Well, what would we do without social media? You all use it, and probably several times a day. But what do Kenyans use the platforms for exactly?
Kenyans have really embraced social media, and it shows, from the uptick of 3 million in 2014 to 12 million in 2021. Facebook accounting for 47% of those users, followed by Twitter with 24%, then YouTube with 15%, and this one will surprise you, Pinterest with 7%, then IG with 6%. And then followed by Reddit with 1%.
Really? I honestly thought Instagram would be way up there, and TikTok, it didn't even make the cut.
Those are the stats. I bet TikTok is following with 0.something%.
It's interesting how the use of social media has changed over the years. Back then it was about checking on your mates, your long lost friends, guys you're with in primary school, high school, campus, but now it's about growing your business, advertising on this space. And just a fun fact, like in Kenya, reports show that in 2022, digital advertising has surpassed television advertising.
So I guess we can say that content is king, right? As it has come a long, long way, evolving and maintaining its relevance through time.
And how do you guys feel about content here at home?
I think the Kenyan voice is becoming bigger and bigger each passing day.
Agreed. I think Kenya has a lot to offer and show the world.
Vivian finds out this is your family land. She will do everything in her power to prove it doesn't belong to you.
You're mine. Nimewambia sihami. Mtauliwa, ko tayari kujihami.
Why do you want to fight for a place that's fighting you?
We have to fulfill your father's wishes.
Watu wangu wa Silanga, tunafaa kuact sahi. No, okomesia. Esia na zito. No, koya, mali ito. Mina ikoro. Mina ikoro!
Do you ever imagine dying on the job? You think Baraza did this?
Grief is a powerful motive. I've been planning a burial, not a murder.
Secretary Kenneth.
There's no need for threats. It's a fact, not a threat.
You know what that means?
Who's your captain? They are going to kill us all.
Ooh.
Who's trying to kill us?
Please tell me you have something.
Where do you think the money comes from?
All thanks to globalization and enhancement in communication. And of course, social media being one of the largest platforms, that's where our voice is heard the loudest. And I would go as far as saying its impact has been felt in all aspects.
How?
Think social purpose. Our very own Kenyans on Twitter, aka KOT, have been very loud in talking about activism, social justice, and so on and so forth.
Who's Kenyans on Twitter?
I think they're the most important thing in this country right now.
When the time comes to rally around a particular idea, there's a way that Kenyans on Twitter do it.
We have secured ourselves a spot in the Internet Hall of Fame with popular hashtags like Occupy the Playground, which is about land grabbing and police brutality.
This is the Langata Road Primary School playground that you can see behind me. And on the January the 19th, something like about 300 students reclaimed this playground from a private developer that had attempted to grab it. The rest of the Kenyan citizens who are here, who are concerned about this, including ourselves, we were mobilized through Twitter. It went viral. It trended several days.
After the hashtag, we re-evaluated how the police treat protesters. We also had the famous hashtag Repeal 162, which started a national conversation on LGBTQA community.
We urge the government to take immediate and deliberate steps to protect and uphold the rights of the LGBTIQ persons by repealing sections 162A and C and 165 of the Penal Code of Kenya, and introducing legislation that prohibits discrimination on all grounds, including sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression.
And my personal favorite, someone tell CNN.
Kenyans are ridiculing the US network on Twitter for its hotbed of terror report. And if we take a look at this image here, you actually see this is what was being broadcast on air, and the strap at the bottom of the screen reads "Security fears as Obama heads to terror hotbed." And it's those two words that people in Kenya are objecting to. They say that they are the victims of terror, not the place where terror is actually breeding.
A hashtag that started a conversation on how international media reports on African stories. One conversation that no one was ready to have, but we all needed to have it. KOT, Kenyans on Twitter, have always been a reminder that when we come together, we make a bigger difference.
Historically, since 2009, continued to place themselves at the world stage when it comes to turning hashtags into movements or ideas much larger.
Kenyans on Twitter have replaced mainstream media when it comes to facts. So I deal a lot on corruption. Like a document like this, for instance, I got it yesterday. Documents are brought to me and I place them in tweets.
And even cultural influence. As the generation that grew up with internet, we're more exposed and aware of the different cultures out there, as we are constantly, every single day, interacting with each other through social media, right? And these interactions are giving each one of us a new respect and awareness of the different cultures out there.
It's seen in the different integration of things. What's a common thing between Kenyan cuisine and Japanese anime? If I asked that question decades ago, you'd probably say nothing. But now, a Japanese anime called Jujutsu Kaisen.
Is it the one that features Kenya and its culture?
Yeah, and all this can be credited to platforms like Showmax, Netflix, Hulu. They've given us the opportunity to showcase our culture both globally and locally.
When you think about it, content has really opened up Kenya for new businesses.
And with social media, so many people are now jumping into influencership. Like, it's actually become a business right now and you can earn money through it.
Hi, my name is Joy Kendi. I am 34 years old and I'm a fashion content creator based in Nairobi, Kenya. I have been doing this for well over 11 years, maybe 12 years. And it started off as a hobby. I had a website called Our Style Kenya where I would document my fashion journey. And I would basically show the people who would read my blog how to shop on a budget, how to style on a budget, shopping secondhand, shopping everywhere from Ngara to Gikomba to a market. And it slowly just evolved over time to being a lifestyle brand and what it is now. So when did I realize that this could be a business? It took me a very long time, especially compared to other content creators. I just could not figure out how to turn what I was doing into a business. And I realized one of my biggest issues was the fact that I was very focused on just fashion and beauty, which would kind of just narrow me down to very specific brands who would ever want to work with me. But once I figured that out, I decided to turn myself into a lifestyle brand, meaning that I could talk about anything from fashion to beauty, food, travel, tech, whatever it is. As long as it was lifestyle and it revolved around me, I figured out that I could include that now into the content that I do. So working with different brands then versus now, very simple. Then a lot of brands really did not understand the importance or the need of working with content creators or influencers. Then they kind of used to lean more towards the traditional aspect when it comes to advertising. So TVC, billboards, newspaper. And over time, they really started to understand the importance of content creators and influencers, because we have a very specific audience that follows us for a very specific reason. And we have direct contact with those people. So if a brand, let's say, is talking about skincare or whatever the case, if they want to speak to an audience that is all about taking care of their skin, they know which influencer would be able to speak directly to their audience. And it took a lot of brands a while to figure that part out, but I feel like a lot of them definitely understand, and a lot of Kenyan brands now are more than willing to work with content creators and influencers, to the point that now I can comfortably say that this is 100% my full-time job. And the reason I'm able to do that is because I put my brain in the aspect of it becoming a business. So I learned everything about it, everything from how to speak to agencies, proposals, how to negotiate, rate cards, all of that. I learned also the production aspect, how to shoot, how to edit, basically had to do everything by myself so I could fully understand it as a business. And that is my story with content creation and what it is that I do.
From our presence of social media businesses, you'll find that Kenya is really gaining appreciation on a global scale for that side hustle mentality. That I will succeed no matter what my circumstances are has really opened Kenya up to be a hub for new businesses and new business ventures.
And it reflects with global giants like Microsoft and Google launching hubs in Kenya, injecting life and creating new opportunities in the market.
Content has really changed the world. It's good to see all these changes globally and locally.
But one thing we believe here at Ogilvy Africa is that Kenya will be at the forefront of that change.
An average Kenyan spends 3 hours and 3 minutes a day on the internet. A very large chunk of it is spent consuming content on social media. In sports, innovation, and entertainment, the content creators of Kenya are bringing their authenticity with a dash of humor to the content they're creating. The time they're spending creating and curating this content is redefining how we do business. It's giving people a source of learning and making their voices heard, not just in the country, but around the world. Content can be a hard thing to define. My favorite definition is a simple one, that content is actually everything that adds value to the reader's or the listener's life. We sincerely hope we added some value to yours. Thank you for joining us, and see you on the next episode.
Well, I'm absolutely thrilled and delighted now to be joined by Dr. Stacey Graham, who is the Global Racial Equity Programs Director at WPP. Stacey, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
This year we see social purpose becoming significantly important, which is a good thing. Why do you think that's so?
I believe in the survey you define social purpose around a few categories such as caring about gender and racial equity, the environment, human rights, and so forth, right? And what we understand about humans is we have an innate desire to have a reason for being. That's another word for purpose. So I'd say if we look at what's happened in the world in the last 2.5, 3 years, that is definitely catapulted into the mainstream. We have all these things coming together that are pinpointing, illustrating how we're failing as a collective.
And do you think that failure as a collective is something that's now being exposed right across the globe?
Absolutely. I would say that even before 2020, we could see it happening, but there's something about a restriction of freedom of movement, right, that makes people sit at home and have nothing else to do but recognize and look into everything that's wrong with the world, if you will. And so I think that it's on people's minds. What does it mean to be in the collective when I'm sitting at home and can't leave my house anymore? What does it mean to really be connected as a society? How do we care for the most vulnerable? And to be really honest, with COVID-19, we didn't do a great job of that. So I think people are asking different questions than they were 2 to 3 years ago.
And I think I found it quite interesting to see the relationship between this movement, I mean, let's call it a movement, coming from the population upwards.
Absolutely. I mean, we also see that some of our health officials do move more politically than we would have expected. But there were people across the world who made the decision to wear a mask even when it was no longer mandated, who stayed at home even when they didn't want to, who got on the streets for probably the largest social movement since 1968, right? It was a global social movement to bring awareness to racial inequality. So I think there's a coming together even in times of divisiveness.
Now, one of the things we've seen in the study is this sort of interrelationship between a country's brand and companies' brands, and we're seeing that interrelationship even more sort of mingled and prevalent this year. So what should companies do to improve their social purpose in relation to how their country is seen?
That is a great question. I think that is something that they're still figuring out. But one thing we know for sure is people aren't simply incentivized by money. That's not enough to keep employees today. Employees want to work somewhere where they feel proud of not only the work that they do, but the things that the company stands for. They want to see their company standing up for social issues that they personally care about.
Stacey, why do you think suddenly companies are finding a political voice as opposed to purely a corporate voice?
I think to an extent, we have been able to observe this shift away. When I studied, there was a clear connection. The business strategy has to align with shareholder value. That's all we care about, maximizing shareholder value. And there was a notion that maximizing shareholder value stood in opposition to a social purpose, if you will. And today, I think people are recognizing that's actually not true. And we increase shareholder value when we can ensure that we have high employee engagement, low turnover, and people care about what they do in the company they work for.
Well, Stacey Graham, that's a fantastic place to stop. This whole topic is something that we are all going to have to understand a lot better, and not just understand it, but also ensure that it's actions as opposed to merely words. But for the moment, Dr. Stacey Graham, the Global Racial Equity Programs Director at WPP, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you.
Hello and a very warm welcome. My name's David Roth and I'm the CEO of the store WPP and Chairman of BAV. Thank you very much indeed for joining me in this very special metaverse experience, exploring the WPP BAV Best Countries 2022 study in conjunction with Wharton Business School and US News. Here we are in the arrivals hall, where you'll be able to discover the key insights from this year's study relating to global trends. Here you'll also find exclusive interviews with global experts and analysis of the data. And what a year we've had. There have been a lot of changes from last year. From here you can also go and visit the 85 countries that are ranked in this year's report. Each of those countries have their own individual room where you can explore a wealth of data and insights into each individual country. You might well see some surprises along your journey. And in the departure area, you can discover more about the study itself. Enjoy your trip around the BAV Best Countries 2022 Metaverse. Well, we're almost at the end of our broadcast. A big thanks to everybody from the local WPP companies who've participated, and of course our central team that's put together all of our Follow the Sun 24 hours of broadcasting, to our directors, to Dasgupta, to Paul Reifer, and our producers, Sarah Cousins and Lady Victoria Robinson. Well, all it's left for me, David Roth at WPP, to say thank you very much indeed for joining, and the next broadcast follows shortly on the hour.